The sun climbed slowly over the plains, pale and tired, as though it too mourned what was about to be lost. Dust hung in the air, like memory itself, fine, persistent, impossible to brush away. Haley stood at the edge of the yard, her black dress brushing her boots. Fingers knotted together so tightly, her knuckles ached. This land had been her husband's pride. Now it was a place of goodbyes. The ranch equipment was laid out in long, careful rows. Plows dulled by honest work. Harnesses softened by years of use. Wagon wheels with cracks that told stories of hard winters and longer summers. Every item carried Thomas's touch. Every scrape and worn edge reminded Haley of mornings when he'd kissed her cheek before heading out, promising to be back before supper. He never broke a promise until death did it for him. Neighbors arrived quietly, tipping hats, murmuring condolences that felt both kind and unbearable. Haley nodded politely, keeping her chin high. Crying would come later. Today was for endurance. The auctioneer mounted a crate, clearing his throat. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed across the yard. Let's begin. The first bid came quickly, then another. The rhythm of numbers filled the space where laughter once lived. With every item sold, Haley felt something tighten and loosen. All at once, grief tugging one way, relief pulling the other. Then she noticed him. George stood near the back, half-shadowed by the barn. He wasn't loud or pushy like some bidders he watched. Waited. When he raised his hand, he did so calmly, as if the decision had already been made long before the auction began. He bought the fence stretcher. Haley frowned. That tool held little resale value. Then he bought the spare wagon wheel. Then an old anvil Thomas hadn't used in years. Curious, when Thomas's saddle was lifted onto display, Haley's breath caught painfully in her chest. She had almost pulled it from the auction at the last moment, but stopped herself. Keeping everything would trap her in yesterday. She needed tomorrow even if it hurt. Opening bid at 40. The auctioneer called. George's hand rose. Another man countered. George answered without hesitation. His voice was steady, respectful, ever aggressive. 70. The gavel struck. Sold. Haley swallowed hard. Her hands trembled now, though she forced them still. She told herself it was better this way. Someone else would care for it. Someone else would ride beneath open skies. When the bidding paused, George approached her slowly, hat in his hands. His boots were worn, but clean. His eyes kind, observant, ever wandered. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Name's George." "Haley," she replied. "I want you to know," he continued, glancing toward the saddle, "I didn't buy anything here lightly. Your husband kept his tools with care. I'll honor that." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "If there's something you decide you're not ready to let go of, say the word. I won't bid on it." That stopped her entirely. Most men saw auctions as opportunity. George saw boundaries. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and stepped away, giving her space as though grief itself were something fragile. The auction resumed, but Haley barely heard it now. She watched George from a distance, noticing how he stayed after each purchase, not eager to leave, not eager to claim. It dawned on her slowly, unmistakably. He wasn't bidding for tools. He was bidding for time, for proximity, for a reason to stay close to a woman, learning how to survive her own loss. And for the first time since Thomas's passing, Haley felt something unfamiliar, stirring beneath the grief. Not betrayal, possibility. By the time the last wagon rolled away, the ranch yard looked unfamiliar to open, to bare, as if someone had stripped the land down to its bones. Where rows of equipment once stood, only flattened dust remained, marked with the memory of weight and use. Haley stood on the porch and watched the distance swallow the buyers one by one, carrying fragments of her former life toward new purposes. She told herself this was necessary. Letting go meant survival. Still, when silence finally settled, it pressed against her ears until it rang. George was the only one who hadn't left. He worked methodically, loading his purchases with careful hands, never rushing, never careless. He treated each piece as if it mattered not just for its usefulness, but for where it had come from. Haley noticed that he paused before lifting the anvil, bracing his legs properly, murmuring something under his breath like a promise. "You don't have to take everything today," she said, stepping off the porch. Her voice sounded strange in the empty yard. George looked up. "I don't mind coming back." Something about that simple statement, coming back, settled into her chest. They walked together toward the barn. The door creaked loudly when George pushed it open, and Haley winced, remembering Thomas always meaning to fix that hinge. "I can take care of that," George said, noticing her expression. "You don't need to." "I know," he replied gently. "But I'd like to." She watched him work, his movements efficient but unhurried. When the hinge finally swung smooth and quiet, Haley felt an unexpected sting behind her eyes. Small repairs had once been her husband's language of love. George wiped his hands on a rag. "There's still some fencing down along the east pasture," he said. "Looks like it's been that way a while." She nodded. "I haven't had the strength to deal with it." "I can fix it tomorrow," he offered. "If that's all right." She hesitated, then surprised herself. "You can stay for supper." George's smile was quick but soft. "I'd like that." They ate at the kitchen table. Simple food, plain conversation. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Didn't fill silences just to hear himself speak. When she mentioned Thomas, George listened without shifting, uncomfortably, without trying to ease the pain with empty reassurance. Later, as dusk painted the sky in quiet purples and golds, they stood near the fence line. Crickets chirred. Wind brushed the tall grass. "Why did you stay?" Haley asked suddenly. George leaned against the post. "I lost my place once," he said after a moment. "Fire took it. Took everything I thought defined me." She turned to him. "What did you do?" "I drifted," he admitted. "Worked where I could. Never stayed long enough to feel rooted again." "Why here?" He met her gaze, then open and honest. "Because this land feels like it's waiting for something, or someone." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. That night, Haley lay awake, listening to the quiet. For the first time since Thomas's death, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt held, as if someone nearby understood the shape of her grief and respected it enough not to disturb it. George slept in the bunkhouse. He didn't ask to stay closer, didn't assume welcome meant invitation. In the morning, she found him already working the fence, humming softly to himself. Watching him, Haley realized something that frightened her more than grief ever had. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to feel again. Morning arrived quietly, carried on a pale sky and the distant lowing of cattle from neighboring land. Haley woke before the sun fully crested the hills, a habit she hadn't yet broken. For a moment, she lay still, listening. No familiar footsteps, no whistle from the yard. The old ache returned, but it didn't hollow her out the way it once had. Instead, she rose. Outside, George was already at work. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to early hours and long days. The repaired fence stood straight and strong, its posts set deeper than before. "You didn't have to rush," Haley said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. George accepted one, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Old habits," he replied. "Besides, the mornings are the best part of the day." She found herself agreeing. After breakfast, Haley led him to the tack room. Dust motes danced in the slanted light. Thomas's saddle rested on a stand, clean but untouched since the auction. "I thought you'd already taken it," she said quietly. George shook his head. "Didn't feel right moving it without you." Her throat tightened. She stepped closer, resting her hand on the worn leather. The smell oil, sun, and time flooded her senses. "He used to say this saddle knew him better than anyone," she murmured. "Carried him through storms, through dry seasons, through everything." George watched her, careful not to interrupt. "I told myself selling it meant I was ready," she continued. "But I don't know if I am." George's voice was gentle. "Letting go doesn't have to be all at once." She looked up at him, surprised. Most people urged her forward. Move on, start over, be strong. George simply allowed her to stand where she was. Later that afternoon, they worked side by side, repairing the corral gate. Sweat streaked George's brow. Haley laughed unexpectedly. When he dropped a nail and had to crawl in the dust to retrieve it, the sound startled her. "I haven't laughed like that in a long time," she admitted. George smiled, wiping his hands. "Neither have I." The air shifted, then subtle, fragile. Awareness bloomed between them, unspoken but undeniable. That evening, the sky darkened faster than expected. Wind rose sharply, snapping loose boards against the barn. Thunder rolled in the distance. A sudden crack echoed. The barn door slammed open. Haley's heart jumped. She grabbed her shawl and ran toward the sound. Rain already beginning to fall. George was there, struggling against the wind, bracing the door with his shoulder. "Help me," he called. Together, they forced it shut, hands slipping, breath coming fast. Rain soaked them both, plastering Haley's hair to her face. When the storm finally eased, they stood beneath the barn's overhang, close enough to feel each other's warmth. For a long moment, neither spoke. George's gaze dropped to her lips, then lifted again. Restraint etched clearly in his expression. "I won't cross a line you're not ready to step over," he said quietly. Tears welled in Haley's eyes, not from fear, but gratitude. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Every time I feel something good, it feels like I'm betraying Thomas." George shook his head. "Love doesn't disappear when someone's gone. It changes shape, but it doesn't stop being love." She pressed her forehead briefly to his chest, just long enough to breathe him in rain, leather, earth. Then she stepped back. "Not yet," she said. "I know," he replied. "I'll wait." That night, the storm passed, leaving the land washed clean. Haley lay awake, listening to the softened sounds of the ranch. Heart heavy but no longer empty. She wasn't ready to let go of the past, but she was learning how to carry it without letting it crush her future. The land changed as weeks passed. Grass pushed greener through the soil, and the air softened with the promise of spring. Haley noticed the shift in small ways: the way the mornings felt less heavy, the way she no longer flinched at the sound of boots on the porch. George's presence had woven itself quietly into her days, steady and unassuming. They fell into a rhythm neither had planned. George repaired what time and neglect had worn down. He mended fences, cleared debris, and brought order back to places grief had allowed to crumble. Haley worked alongside him when she could, and when she couldn't, she watched from the porch, learning his movements the way she once learned Thomas's. The guilt came in waves. Some days, it whispered that her heart was straying too far. Other days, it reminded her she was still alive and deserved to feel that truth. One afternoon, Haley found George near the old cottonwood at the edge of the property. Sitting with his back against the trunk, He held a folded piece of paper in his hands, studying it with an expression she hadn't seen before. "Everything all right?" she asked. He looked up, hesitating. "I got an offer." Her chest tightened. "From where?" "Up north. Big operation, good pay, long-term work." He folded the paper carefully. "More stability than I've had in years." "That sounds like something you should take," she said, though the words felt hollow. "I thought so too," George replied. But the idea of leaving didn't sit right. Silence stretched between them. Wind rustled the cottonwood leaves overhead. "I never meant to make things complicated for you," he said finally. "If my staying here keeps you tied to pain, I'll go." The thought of his absence struck harder than she expected. She pictured the ranch without him, the quiet, returning sharp and unrelenting. "You don't make things harder," she said softly. "You make them lighter." George studied her face, searching for certainty. "Haley, I won't replace what you lost. I don't want to. I don't need you to," she replied. "I just need you to be here." The words felt dangerous, honest, true. That evening, Haley brought out Thomas's saddle. She set it on the fence rail between them. "I've been holding on to this like it's the last piece of him," she said. "But Thomas loved this land. He wouldn't want it frozen in grief." She met George's eyes. "If you stay, I want you to use it." He inhaled sharply. "Only if you're sure." She nodded. "I am." George didn't touch the saddle immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand, slow enough for her to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their fingers laced together, tentative but firm. The contact sent a quiet heat through her chestnut, overwhelming, not rushed. Later, under a sky heavy with stars, George finished unpacking his wagon. "You're staying?" Haley asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," he said. "If you'll have me." She smiled small, real. "I think this place could use someone who knows how to stay." He leaned in then, stopping just short of her lips. "May I?" She closed the space herself. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, filled with care rather than urgency. It tasted of patience and promise, not escape. When they parted, Haley felt something settle into place, not the end of grief, but the beginning of balance. She wasn't forgetting Thomas, she was choosing life. Spring arrived without asking permission, but came in the form of green pushing through tired soil, of birds returning to fences that had once stood empty, of sunlight stretching longer across the fields. Haley felt it inside herself, to something soft and steady, unfolding where grief had once ruled unchecked. George stayed, not just in body, but in intention. He rode the land with Thomas's saddle, careful and respectful, never treating it as something merely his. Each evening he returned it to its stand in the tack room, as if acknowledging that some things belonged to memory as much as to the present. Haley watched him often, not with longing alone, but with a quiet gratitude that surprised her. She had feared love would erase what came before. Instead, it made room for it. One morning, Haley found herself standing at Thomas's grave, the wind stirring her dress. George waited at a distance, giving her the space she needed. "I thought loving again would mean losing you," she whispered. "But you're still here, just in a different way." The weight she'd carried for months felt lighter when she turned back toward the house, toward George. They began to plan, without realizing it. Repairs became improvements. Conversations turned toward the future, spoken carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The ranch no longer felt like a monument to loss, but a living thing again. One evening, George handed Haley a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lay the old fence stretcher he'd bought at the auction. "I want you to have this back," he said. "Some things were never meant to leave." She smiled, tears shining. Then you weren't bidding to keep it. No, he admitted. I was bidding to stay close enough to ask if I could. That night, under a sky thick with stars, George took her hand. I don't want to replace your past, he said. I just want to build something beside it. Haley looked at the land, the fences mended, the fields alive again, and felt the truth settle deep within her. Then stay, she said. Not as a guest, as family. George's breath caught. Are you sure? Yes, she said, firm and unafraid. Love doesn't disappear when someone's gone. It changes shape, but it still grows. He kissed her. Then, not tentative this time, but certain, grounded in patience and choice. It was a kiss rooted in tomorrow. As dusk settled over the ranch, Haley realized something profound. She hadn't auctioned away her life. She had made room for a new chapter. And love, true. Love had found her not by force, but by quiet devotion. By a man willing to wait, to listen, and to stay. The sound of the gavel had once marked endings. Now, the land echoed with beginnings. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.